Good morning. Go ahead and grab a seat, grab a seat, grab a seat. I'm excited about this morning. We are kicking off a new series called The Third Wheel. But before we jump into that, I want to ask you, the clipboard that you just sat down and moved out of your way, on it is a connection card. It says welcome to Element on it. If you take a minute, fill it out. As I'm beginning the message this morning, I greatly appreciate it. It gives us a chance to get to know you better and be able to connect with you. If you're a first timer, we got a free gift for you. If you fill it out, just hang on to it. Come find me out in the lobby. And we got a free t-shirt that's comfortable and that you'll appreciate getting. And so hopefully you'll take a minute and do that. But as we get into this morning, I've got some props up here. I got a storyboard that we're going to be working through as we go through a story in the Bible over the next few weeks. And then I'm also going to be just talking about the stories that we get lost in. So I don't know about you, but I'm not much of a reader. I get lost in movies. And I love to get lost in movies. I love to watch movies, and there's certain movies that I turn on and I'll see that they're on the TV, and it's like a nightmare because I know that I have things to do, but for the next 2 hours I'm going to be watching whatever movie it is. When my brother was getting ready to go away into the Air Force, it was any movie that had to do with the military. So like Lone Survivor could come on, and then the next movie could be American Sniper, and it would be like 5 hours of my day gone just watching movies. And I might come in the middle, I might not understand everything in the story, but I was excited to just watch the movie, jump in, felt like I related to it and I connected with it. And then because of Lone Survivor, I got into Mark Wahlberg and some other stuff that he had out there. One of the other guys that really captivates my attention is Denzel. So I don't know what you think about him. I don't really care. I know that all of his roles are the same. That's fine with me. It doesn't bother me. It's entertaining and I enjoy watching it. It's gotten to the point of this. The other day, I'm watching a movie that I've watched multiple times, and I've seen it all the way through maybe once or twice, but I've seen bits and pieces of it probably 30 times. And it was to my favorite scene. And in this movie, it zooms in on his face, and then the lens changes, and the whole camera angle moves, and it looks like you're looking through the eyes of Denzel Washington. And it's kind of blurry. And in that moment, I paused it. Now, Kim was upstairs. She was not around at all. She comes down the steps. I've got no description of what's going on the screen. It's just this pause scene. And she walks by and she goes, "Why'd you pause The Equalizer?" And I was like, it's a problem because you don't even like this movie that much. And I've watched it enough times that you can just walk by the television in the middle of a pause scene and go, I know exactly what movie that is. So, welcome to Element. My name is Ryan. I'm a bit of a addict when it comes to some of these things. But in any case, I don't want to talk about any of those movies this morning. I do want to talk about two, though. One of them is a movie I will watch every single time I see it on television. As long as I have time, I will watch it till the end. I absolutely love this movie. It's a movie that paints a picture. It starts with a young boy named William. He doesn't have a lot of money. He comes from a poor family. He wants to be something great. He wants to be a knight. He wants to be able to accomplish something that only royalty can do, but he's not qualified for it. Just because of his family line, just because of where he comes from, he's not able to go do it. And you have this famous scene where his dad says, "You can do anything you want, William." And he says, "Is it possible to change my stars?" And he says, "If you believe enough, it's possible." And people make fun of him and whatever, but he goes off and he winds up, in the middle of his journey, he winds up meeting this guy who is playing the role of Geoffrey Chaucer. It's a bit weird, but he meets this guy walking down the road, and he says, "Well, I'm a writer. I can write you papers to make it look like you're royalty." And he writes him papers, and he fakes this whole thing, knowing that punishment's on the other side. He winds up winning all kinds of jousting tournaments, and at the end, one of his rivals says, "You're not actually a knight." And the king comes in, and I don't want to spoil the movie, but let's just say that Heath Ledger wins, and it's a classic movie. If you haven't seen it, even though you know the end of it, I'd still suggest going and watching it. It's A Knight's Tale. It is wonderful. It is completely cheesy. They do the song "We Will Rock You" in the 1500s. So I didn't know that song was that old. His gear is made by Nike, which is kind of cool. And he was like a precursor to a lot of things I didn't realize. But in any case, I love that movie. If I have... Kim has names for a couple of our daughters, but if we have a third daughter, she may be named Jocelyn after the girl in this movie. I love the movie A Knight's Tale. The second movie that I get lost in doesn't come on TV much. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen it on TV. I only have seen it a couple times because I dated a girl who liked the movie, and it has Leonardo DiCaprio in it, and so maybe that was why we watched it. In any case, it was the movie that, for me, took Shakespeare from a guy who wrote words that I didn't understand into somebody that I viewed as a literary genius. Somebody that I went, I don't understand this, I don't get it, and I'm going to pick on the school system for a minute. I think it is such a lame way to learn to read a play by just having like different people in the room sit there and read words that they don't understand and stumble through them. It helps me none to visualize it, to get a good picture of it, to actually lose myself in that story. I always found it impossible in school. But this movie, Romeo and Juliet, with Leonardo DiCaprio, absolutely unbelievable. I want to suggest it. I'd encourage you to go watch it. Here's the way the movie works. It is written by Shakespeare. It is all of his lines. It is all of his words. Nothing is changed verbally in the thing. But like the dagger is a 9mm pistol. It's kind of like set in modern day times, but it's a fascinating movie to watch. I love it. But like this movie, like, do you bite your thumb at me, sir? No, sir, but I bite my thumb, sir, but not at you, sir. Like I can quote it. I can get lost in it. I love Romeo and Juliet, but it made me love Shakespeare. And then I learned that Julia Stiles is in like a ton of Shakespeare movies. So like 10 Things I Hate About You is The Taming of the Shrew, or Othello, the movie O, with Mekhi Phifer. There's just movies that I like that have helped me get a better grasp of what Shakespeare's talking about. And you're going, I didn't come here to hear about Shakespeare, but it matters. Because the story we're going to be reading over the next 4 weeks, see, we're in a series, we're kicking it off this morning, it's called The Third Wheel. It's a series for singles. Here's basically what we do. Every February, we like to do a series for married couples. We talk about sex, we talk about dating, we talk about loving one another. It's a lot of fun. The married people love it. But I feel like we leave a group out. And we've got a lot of single people in the room. Maybe you've been married before, maybe you're divorced, maybe you're widowed, maybe you have some kids and you've never been married. I don't know what your story is. But we're going to take a look over the next 4 weeks at the story of Ruth. And here's some things about the story that I want you to know. It mentions God 3 times, but it never has prayer. We don't see a lot of like interaction with God. We don't see a lot of even considering God. But what we see, like there's been people who have even debated, should this even be in the Bible? But I'm convinced that it does, because ultimately this story is one that leads to Jesus. But at the end of the day, it's a story written thousands of years before Christ, after the time of the Judges. The Judges were probably one of the most wicked times in all the history of Israel. It started out with some halfway decent judges. Really, that's kind of what they were. They weren't great. They definitely weren't totally moral, but they were halfway decent. And what we see from the nation of Israel, see, they wanted a king. God said, no, I'm going to give you a judge. And so they take this judge, and then they listen to him for a while, and then they begin to like act as if there's not a God, and go off and they make their own decisions, and they do life their own way. They do what's right in their own eyes. And then what we see is like destruction and pain and struggle. And then they eventually come back and they go, God, we need you again. And then they kind of go right back into that same spiral. And what we see over the book of Judges in 16 chapters is we see like some decent judges, some okay judges, some really not okay judges, and then some wicked judges, and then judges that the weird gets real strange, because it's just all kinds of wickedness. And then right at the end of that is where we pick up the story of Ruth. And really in the story, there's 3 main characters. There's Ruth, there's her mother-in-law, Naomi, and there's Boaz, who's just somebody who's connected. And we'll kind of get to him later. We're not really going to talk about him at all this morning. But here's what I'm convinced of, that in this story, we'll be able to find ourselves. But my hope is this. My hope is that over the next 4 weeks, you'd lose yourself a little bit in the story of Ruth, so on the other end, maybe we can find ourselves. I'm convinced the story is fascinating and well worth reading. So with that said, let's jump into it. So if you have a Bible, Ruth chapter 1 is where we're going to start, and we're just going to go through Ruth 1 this morning. I believe Ruth is kind of laid out in like 4 acts, and it's kind of broken up by chapters. So we get some background information to help us start, and here's what it says. In the days when the judges ruled in Israel. So they're in a kind of a wicked time in this nation of Israel. A severe famine came upon the land, so a man from Bethlehem in Judah left his home, went to live in the country of Moab, taking his wife and his 2 sons with him. So let's get a good idea of what's going on here, because that verse is obviously real hard to follow. We got a guy, right? Now, by the way, my imagery and my drawing skills are unbelievable. There's one person who appreciates them. There's another person who's taking a picture. I don't know if that's to make fun or to be excited. Just a side note, if you guys don't like check in on Facebook Live ever, I almost fell off the stage last week. At minute 40 of the video, it's on YouTube or on Facebook, you can see it. I stepped like this, almost went down during prayer. If you didn't see it, you had your eyes closed during prayer, congratulations to you for being holier than me, all right? In any case, we got a guy who has a wife, all right? They hold hands, that's kind of great. And they've got 2 children, little Johnny and little Micah, sure. And what we know is that, that's really not their names, we'll get their names in a minute, but I don't remember them. What we know is that in their land, you have rain, but you have no rain. They're in a famine, right? And so the dad says, I have to be able to provide for my family. I've got to care for them. We live in Bethlehem. We live in this area. I want to care for my family, but where we're at isn't working because we're farmers and we don't have rain. We don't have what we need. So he packs up the family and they take their lovely little journey. They kind of wander all over the place and they find themselves now in the land of Moab. But at this point, those aren't little kids anymore. We have a big kid and another one, and my drawings are off, so just, kind of follow it. If you're taking notes this morning, good luck. All right? So here's where we're at. They're now in the land of Moab with their 2 sons. The man's name was Elimelech. That's a classic name. So Eli and his wife Naomi. So we get Eli and Naomi. Their sons were Mahlon and Chilion, and they were Ephrathites. Guys, when you get to words like this and you're not sure how to read them, don't get lost. Just read them quick, read them confident. Everybody will think you got them right. All right. That's what we were taught in seminary. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in the land of Judah, and when they reached Moab, they settled there. So now they're settled in the land of Moab. Then Elimelech died, and Naomi was left with her 2 sons, which, while that's a sad tragedy, it's not really too big of a deal because she's got 2 sons to still take care of her. Now, I'm not promoting this philosophy, but they lived in a very patriarchal society. So if the men weren't around, the women didn't really have money. The men were the ones who went off and worked. The women were the ones who took care of the kids. You can say it's traditional. You can say it's old-fashioned. It doesn't matter. It's their story. All right? But Elimelech dies, and fortunately, Naomi has 2 sons that can still take care of her. So then the 2 sons marry 2 Moabite women because they're living in Moab. They find 2 women. They're like, hey, what's up, girl? They meet 2 different women. One of them was named Orpah. I'm not sure where that name comes from or what it means or anything about it. It's just a weird name to me. The other one is named Ruth. And so now we've got 2 sons, 2 wives, and Naomi. But about 10 years later, both Mahlon and Chilion died. So we got to get rid of them. So at this point, we've got 3 women. If you think about this, the money train that was coming in is no longer. Really not much for them to do, really no solution. And without her sons or her 2 husbands, Naomi was alone. And then Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had blessed his people in Judah by giving them good crops again. So basically the land that they had come from had rain again. So Naomi and her daughters-in-law got ready to leave Moab and return to the homeland. And with her 2 daughters-in-law, she set out from the place where she had been living, and they took the road that would lead them back to Judah. Now, here's the weird part, and I want to pause here for a second because the story is going to continue to move forward, but I think for a lot of us, it feels very, very real because the story is moving forward, and at the same time, it feels like we're going backwards. See, when I talk to a lot of single people, or even when I talk to a lot of married people, because let's be real, there's a lot of married, lonely people. I mean, Liz says this statement, and I've kind of held on to it. You can be single and lonely. You can be married and lonely. It'd be better to be single and lonely. But there's a lot of people who are married that are in some rough situations, don't like where they're at, don't like where they find themselves, but have to learn how to move forward from there. But at times in our lives, there are moments when we're called to move forward where our life is progressing, the clock is still running, but it feels like we're going backwards. That's the moment that I think Naomi finds herself in. And she stops along this path, and she stops with her 2 daughter-in-laws that don't really have much of a connection to her anymore, and she says, listen, go back home. I don't have anything for you. Go back to your mother's homes, and may the Lord reward you for your kindness to your husbands and to me. May the Lord bless you with the security of another marriage. And then she kissed them goodbye, and they all broke down and wept. So they hug it out. They have this moment, and then they say, no, we're not going to do that. We want to go with you to your people. And Naomi replied, why? Why should you go on with me? Could I give birth to other sons who could grow up to be your husbands? I know that sounds weird, but she's like, I can't provide you what you need. She says, no, my daughters, return to your parents' home, for I'm too old to marry again. And even if it were possible, and if I got married tonight and I bore sons, then what? Would you wait for them to grow up and refuse to marry someone else? No, of course not. Things are far more bitter for me than they are for you, because the Lord himself has raised his fist against me. Now, real quick, I want to just make like a side note. So she tells them, go back home. But one of the things that we get from Naomi is this. I think there's so much value in this. Naomi is bitter, but she knows it. There's a lot of us in the room that are bitter and have no idea. And it's destroying our relationships, and it's affecting the way we interact with one another, and it's affecting the way we connect with God, because we're struggling with things that we won't own. Naomi is at least embracing the idea. Maybe she's not happy about it, but she's at least owning the idea that things are bitter for her. It keeps going. Again, they weep together. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung tightly to Naomi. And Naomi said to her, look, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people. So she's gone. We're going to get rid of her. It doesn't really matter. She didn't die, but we're crossing her out anyway because she's out of the story. Your sister has gone back to her people and her gods. You should do the same. But Ruth replied, don't ask me to leave you and turn back. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. By the way, there's 2 of the 3 times that God's mentioned in this whole book. It's not much. But what we see from Ruth is loyalty. She continues, she says, wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord punish me severely if I allow anything but death to separate us. And so what we see from Naomi is bitterness, but what we see from Ruth is loyalty. When Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she said nothing more. She's like, you're beyond arguing with. I don't need to keep going. So the 2 of them continued on their journey. And when they came to Bethlehem, the entire town was excited by their arrival. Is it really Naomi? The woman said. It's like, oh, the long-lost friend has come back home. And she responds, I love this, don't call me Naomi. Instead, call me Mara, because the Almighty has made life very bitter for me. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me home empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has caused me to suffer and the Almighty has sent such tragedy upon me? She's bitter to the point that she's changed her name and said, look, if you want to understand me, don't ever call me by the name that you know me. Just refer to me as Mara, because it means bitter. That's my story. That's my name. That's where I'm at. I'm frustrated. I don't like life. I don't like where I'm at. I've made the journey back, and now she's back here, and this journey continues. She's back, and we've got Naomi, and we've got Ruth. One is bitter, and the other one's loyal. And that's really the story. That's the beginning of it. That's the first act, is somebody who finds themselves in a situation they never intended to be. Can you imagine what it is to be Naomi in this? She married a respectable man. She raised 2 children. She cared for her family. She was well invested. And for whatever reason, he passes away. He dies after he moves them to a far-off land. And he says there, he comes to her and says, listen, let's move to this land because I can't do my job here. Let's move away from your friends. Let's move away from your family. Let's go to a place where I can truly provide. And she says, okay, I'll follow you. See, it starts out Naomi's loyal. She goes and she raises her kids and she cares for them, and her husband dies. And then her sons grow up and they marry women, and she's like, this is great. I'm waiting for grandkids. And then her sons die. And now she finds herself a foreigner in a land with not a lot to rely on, and 2 daughter-in-laws that she's connected to, but not really anymore. I think if I found myself there, or in moments of life where I found myself in a place where I didn't want to be because of things that I didn't choose, I find myself bitter too. She's in a place she didn't want to go, in a situation she didn't do anything to deserve, but she finds herself stuck. And I wonder if your situation, whether it's married or single or dating or whatever it may be, is a place where you find yourself this morning stuck. Not because of necessarily a series of decisions you've made, but more so because of a series of decisions that other people have made. Or things that have been outside of your control or outside of even their control. And you find yourself kind of just stuck. Or maybe you're like Ruth. And you go, look, I'm married into this family, and I'm married a respectable man, and I was excited about this whole thing, and I love my mother-in-law, and I've cared for her, and I've walked her through this, and we've spent all kinds of time together, and she taught me some recipes, and we've had a lot of fun, but now my husband's dead too, and I don't know where to go, and going back to my family feels like 10 steps back, and I don't really want to do that, but going forward to a new land means that I'm not going to know anybody. And what I'm walking towards is really a great unknown. And maybe there's some intrigue in that because it's like there's so many options and so much variety and so much everything. But at the same time, as I step into it, I don't really know how I'm going to provide for myself. And I'm not really sure what's going to happen. And I'm just going to follow Naomi. I'm going to be loyal to somebody who's been loyal to me. See, I think one of the areas that we struggle with in relationships is that we get into relationships and we begin to abandon the friendships that we have. I watch it with singles. I watch it with married people. I watch it with people on a consistent basis. You have people who are friends, who have been solid, who you know are there for you. And you get into a relationship and they don't like them. And instead of hearing that, you just walk away. And you begin to avoid it. You begin to run from it. You begin to just neglect that relationship. And I want to challenge you this morning that wherever you find yourself, you've got to ask your question, who should I be loyal to? Who should I be loyal to? And let me be real clear. I don't want general answers. And I don't want to challenge you to think in just like conceptual things. The answer to this question is not family. The answer to this question is not friends. It should be very, very specific. Who should you be loyal to? I want you to think of a name, not of like a generality. There are people in your life who would be there for you no matter what. There are people in your life that will care for you and encourage you and challenge you to be more like Jesus or challenge you to take your next step and to do the right thing. And those are people worth following. Who should you be loyal to? Don't abandon friendships. And this isn't a message where I'm going to say something that might offend somebody. I don't really know. This isn't like bros before hoes, right? Like, this is not what I'm trying to tell you right now. That's like the classic statement among guys, like, oh, you got to keep your friends above the girls. Whatever. That's not this message. I'm not saying you can never make them a priority. I'm not saying you can't ever do that. All I'm saying is don't walk away from the friendships that you find most valuable because you find yourself in a relationship with somebody who's given you something that they can't. I think most of the time when we do that, we're chasing our own insecurities and we're getting fulfillment out of something that really isn't even there. The second thing I want to challenge you with is this question. Where am I? And how did I get here? What's your storyboard look like? I'm going to break news to you. This is going to be a groundbreaking statement. Get your pen ready. This is going to be huge. You ready? You are where you are. It's huge. Pray and go home right there. You are where you are. Let me unpack it a little bit. Wherever you are in life is where you are in life, whether you like it or not. If you're bitter, you're bitter. If you're overjoyed, you're overjoyed. If you're frustrated, you're frustrated. That's where you are. If you're lonely, you're lonely. If you're in a relationship, you're in a relationship. If it's complicated, it's complicated. But wherever you are is where you are. So you've got to ask the question, where am I? Am I happy? Am I sad? Am I bitter? Am I frustrated? Am I alone? Am I with someone? Like, clarify your own situation. I want you, if I gave you like the marker and I told you to come up here, and I want you just to draw your own square. Some of you would say, I need it to be bigger. All right. I get it. But if you could draw your own square, I want you to be able to paint a very, very, very clear picture of where you are. What is your situation? How do you feel about it? Where are you at emotionally? Where are you at physically? What things are you working on? Embrace your situation. Be a little bit like Naomi today. I'm here and I'm not happy about it. And stomp your foot and pound your fist and do whatever you got to do, but at least own your story. So if this is the clear picture of where you are, and I want you to kind of envision that, maybe you draw it out this week as you work through this, answer, where am I? But I also want you to go back, and I want you to answer, how did I get here? And that might be painful, and that might be frustrating, and that might be scary, because there's a lot of things, and there's a lot of wounds, and there's a lot of parts of our lives that we don't want to embrace that are in this part of our story, because this is our past. But here's what I want you to know. Your past is your past. It's not going to change. And you can keep band-aiding something so other people can't see it, but the infection's going to keep growing if you don't actually deal with it. I have a pastor that I call a friend, but let me clarify what that means. It means I've emailed him, and a couple different times he's emailed me back. So basically, we're bros. All right. He's a pastor. He was a pastor of a church. So it was about 35,000 people. I went to Israel with him to learn from him, not because we were good friends and we were hanging out. But in any case, I call him a friend. He calls me the weird guy that emails him a couple times a year. In any case, he tells a story. And I love this story because I think it paints such a great picture of where we're at and how we deal with our past so many different times in life. But when he was a young kid, like 12, 13 years old, he got an air pistol. And his father taught him the number one rule of gun safety. This, if you don't know anything about guns, if you own a gun, if you don't own a gun, it doesn't really matter. The number one rule of gun safety is this: never point a gun at something you don't intend to shoot. But it's not loaded, doesn't matter. Never point a gun at something you don't intend to shoot, because maybe there's one in there that you forgot about. Maybe you don't know that that's loaded or unloaded. You never point a gun at anything you don't intend to shoot. But the safety's on. It doesn't matter. Just don't point a gun at something you don't intend to shoot. So he's 12, so he doesn't listen to that. And the gun's not loaded. It's an air rifle. It's not loaded. So what he's doing is he's taking it while a friend's over the house, and he's pointing it at his own hand, and he keeps pulling the trigger. And like this burst of air kind of hits his hand, and he's like, oh, this is awesome. And he's fun, and he's 12, so it's kind of weird, but it's what he's doing, right? Well, what he didn't realize that somewhere in that gun, maybe further down in the chamber, was actually a bullet, a BB. And so he pulls the trigger, and all of a sudden it's like, whoosh, oh crap. And now he's got a BB stuck in his hand. And he tries to get it out, and he's not really that successful, but he's like, I can't tell Dad about this because Dad has told me and preached to me and preached at me and yelled at me that never point a gun at something you don't intend to shoot. And I didn't intend to shoot my hand, but it's now what happened. So I don't want to do it, and I definitely don't want to be caught. And so he begins to like just wrap some gauze in his hand. And day one goes by, like that evening goes by, and Dad comes home, and Dad doesn't see it. And he's like, sweet, I got away with it. And he's got like his bloody gauze, his whatever, he kind of throws it away, he changes it the next day. The next day, Dad comes home in the evening, and Dad doesn't see the thing, and he's like, great, I'm getting away with it. Well, the third day, he wraps up his hand because it's still in a lot of pain. He's not really sure what's going on, but he definitely doesn't want to get caught, so he wraps up his hand. And his dad says, boy, what's wrong with you? He said, what do you mean? Like, kind of like doing this thing, kind of feels like what a toddler would do, right? Like hiding his arm behind his back as if somehow that's going to, my arm fell off. I can't show you what's going on. And he goes, no, let me see your hand. And his dad takes his hand and unwraps it. He goes, what happened? It's disgusting and pus-filled and infected. And he comes clean. He says, I was shooting my gun, but it wasn't loaded. And I was shooting it at my hand, just watching the air bounce off. And his dad goes, but then it was loaded. And you did it. And you shot yourself. He said, yeah. He's, why you haven't told me? He said, because I didn't want you to be mad at me. He said, we have to go to the doctor. And here's the thing with the story. They go to the doctor, and the doctor said, if you would have waited another day, maybe another 2 days, we would have had to cut off part of your hand because of how bad the infection is. And I remember him telling that story from stage, but here's the point I want to make. I think so many of us are trying to band-aid infected wounds from our past, pretending that somehow if we can just cover them up, we never have to deal with them. But reality is that if we never deal with them, if we never allow them to heal, then they're going to kill us from the inside out. I talked to somebody this week, and I want to give you one word of encouragement and kind of a how-to if you have the opportunity to go to counseling. I love counseling. I see my counselor on a regular basis. Multiple times he asks me, why do you still come? Not because he doesn't like me, just because he's like, man, you've been doing counseling for a long time. And I'm like, man, Tom, it just helps me feel healthy. It's so valuable to me. I don't want to carry my baggage on the stage every week. I want to be a healthy person and model healthiness emotionally for people. So this is so valuable to me. But I had a conversation with somebody this week that said, I've been going to counseling for months, and I don't think it's been making any difference. And I said, why not? And they said, because I've never gotten into my past. And I was like, what do you go and talk about? And they're like, I talk about the symptoms. I talk about what I'm currently struggling with. I talk about the fact that I want to scream profanity, or that I ride down the road and scream the F word 100 freaking times and put my middle finger up in the air at places that I've been wronged by. And I go to my counselor and I talk about that. And she tries to give me some healthy tools and some things to put together so that I can stop making those decisions. But what I never actually deal with is the root of all my problems, which comes from my past of abuse and the neglect of parents and struggles and wounds that I'm not even fully aware of. I don't get into those things. And I said, why? Why would you not get into them? And the person said to me, because I didn't know I was supposed to. And I kind of chuckled, but I had to ask why. And she said, because when I started going to church and I accepted Christ, people told me, trust in the Lord and lean not on your own understanding. And I've been convinced that the way that I can do that is to not go back and address the baggage of my past, but I'm just going to trust Jesus to deal with it. And she said, I told my counselor that today, and my counselor said, well, you were sold bad theology. And I'm sorry, but we got to deal with it. And I talked to the person, and they said, I feel like healing is a possibility now because the wound has been exposed. And I know we're going to dive into it, and I know it's going to be uncomfortable, and I know that BB's got to come out of my hand, but at the end of the day, healing is possible if I'm willing to do the work and go back. So here's what I want you to do. I don't want you to go back and relive your past. That's not what I'm asking. I don't even want you to go back and embrace your past and approve of it and say that all of it was good, because it probably wasn't. I'm not asking you to love your story. All I'm asking you to do is this: own your story. Where am I and how did I get here? You've got to own your story. Because until we can own our story, where we're at and where we came from, moving forward is nearly impossible. It's where we find ourselves in the story. If we're bitter, we're bitter. If we're loyal, we're loyal. Whatever we are, we are. Let's learn to embrace it there. Because I'm convinced that the reason Jesus came wasn't so that we could sugarcoat our story for our God of the universe. But the reason he came was so he could step into our mess and bring healing to our lives. It's the reason we do communion. I'm going to ask Kim to go ahead and come forward. There's a couple people coming forward. They're going to be serving communion. On it is a tray. It's got 2 cups. They're stacked. One of them's got a cracker. One of them's got some juice. It's a representative of the fact of Christ dying on the cross, but it's a reminder to us that he steps into our mess and gives us the opportunity to have healing. And so I want to encourage you, as you get that, you can just take it on your own. You don't need to wait for me. I'm not going to walk you through, drink the juice, eat the cracker, any of that stuff. You can go ahead and just take that. If you want to be reminded this morning that regardless of what your story is, healing is possible. If you don't want to take it this morning, you don't have to. Nobody's going to judge you or ask you any questions about it, anything like that. But guys, I want to challenge you to ask these 2 questions. Who should I be loyal to? Who in my life has been loyal to me? Who in my life can model something for me? Who in my life is worth my loyalty? And then ask the question, where am I? And how did I get here? Because the book of Ruth in chapter 1, Act 1, closes this way. It says, Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by her daughter-in-law Ruth, and the young Moabite woman. They arrived in Bethlehem in late spring at the beginning of the barley harvest. And here's what I want you to understand, that just like Ruth, our story isn't over yet. Let's pray. God, I thank you for who you are. God, I thank you for the way that you move. I thank you for the fact that you step into our mess and give us hope to be able to come out of it, that healing is possible. But God, we've got to be people who stop covering up infected wounds with Band-Aids and hoping that they get better. We've got to stop hiding from our past and from our struggles and from our situation. We've got to learn to own our story. So God, I pray that this morning you would be with us as a group of people. Be with us as a group of individuals, whether we're single or married or divorced or wherever we find ourselves relationally or wherever we find ourselves with you. God, I pray that you would help us to be people who would learn to own our story. Help us to ask the question about where our loyalty should be. And help us to learn to own our story, because God, just like Ruth, our story isn't over. So I pray that next week you continue to tell it and continue to help us see ourselves in it. It's in your name I pray. Amen.